Welcome everybody. My name is David Simmonds. I'm Member of Parliament for Islip, Northern and Pinner, and I currently chair the All-Party Parliamentary Group for Social Work, having taken over from Alex Cunningham MP, who is with us on the call today, who has led it for a while previously. Today's session is going to focus on the issues surrounding unaccompanied asylum-seeking children. And I, in this context, also chaired the All-Party Parliamentary Group on migration. And there's a great deal of debate around all sorts of issues to do with unaccompanied children, ranging from the process and the issues involved in age assessments, and the responsibility, if at all, for social workers to undertake that, required at the moment by the courts through the Merton compliant age assessment, but subject to much debate, through to the support for young people who are care leavers and how that should be structured, and the role that they would play in terms of education, the routes into employment, the support that they have from local authorities and other organisations. So the British Association for Social Workers has organised a series of panels today, the first of which we're going to start in just a moment. And the aim really, particularly for Alex and I and for Lord Dubs when he joins us today, is to learn as much as we can about the practicalities of the process that is followed, that will then inform the debate around the Nationality and Borders Bill, and also the work that we do in Parliament to try and improve the way in which unaccompanied young people are treated, to make sure that their legal status is as clear and straightforward as possible, and that they receive the support to which they are entitled, whilst also, of course, maintaining the right level of public confidence in the way that the system is operating. So our first panelists, I'm expecting, I just want to check that we have everybody here. We have Dylan Hubbard. Yes, I can see Dylan, you're on my screen. Maya Pritchard.
Hi, I'm here. I didn't actually know that I was presenting anything, but I will.
I don't think you were expected to present, but I think if you're okay to answer some questions as we come through. We've got our Crown Ambassadors, Daniel and Tom. I don't know whether Daniel and Tom will be able to join us just yet.
Yes,
okay.
I have.
You have been able to join. Fantastic. We've got Sarah Hammond.
Hello.
Hello, Sarah. Welcome. And Karen Goodman. Joe Scope.
Hello.
Hello, Sarah. Welcome. I'm a slight challenge with the sound there, but not to worry. Look, let's get underway. Make the best use of everybody's time. So the plan is that the parliamentarians pose a question to the panel, and I'll invite the panelists to respond. Clearly, don't feel confined in your answers to just address the question that you've been asked, to answer more broadly any issues that you feel arise. The first area we're going to look at is around arriving in the UK. And I'm going to ask panelists to talk about, from your perspective, what the process is like for an unaccompanied asylum-seeking child.
Sorry, David, there's all sorts of noise. Sorry, David, all sorts of noise on the line from people who perhaps aren't muted. It's very difficult to hear what you're saying.
I think I struggle a little bit with that as well. I think Alex was saying it's difficult to hear what was being said because there was some noises off, but I think that's settled down. Alex, can you give me a thumbs up? Can you hear okay? Great. And I saw Lord Dubs has joined us as well. Alf, can you just indicate you can hear okay? Yeah. Looks like it.
Yes, I can hear okay. I'll mute again. I'll mute myself again.
Fantastic. Right. So perhaps if we start maybe just in reverse order as the agenda, Joe Schofield, perhaps would you like to share your thoughts about that question of what the process is like for an unaccompanied asylum-seeking child when they arrive in the UK?
Hi, thank you. Sorry, I didn't hear the question the first time round because of all the noise background. Sorry.
So can you tell us from your perspective what the process is like for an unaccompanied asylum-seeking child when they arrive into the UK?
Yeah, so I'm probably not the best person for that question, in that my speciality is around and my expertise is around age assessment. So I think there are people who are better placed to answer that question than I am, because I'm not on the front line. I'm not part of a direct social work team. We just provide independent services.
Well, that's an extremely helpful answer. Perhaps Karen Goodman, then, if I move to you.
Oh, hello. Yes, good afternoon. Nice to see you. Nice to see everybody else here, and particularly Lord Dubbs, who I know well because he and my mother arrived on similar trains. I have a huge amount of experience of what happens to the children when they arrive, but it really depends on which aspect you'd like us to focus on. If you want to talk about age assessment, or if you want to talk about how they're received, perhaps you could give a little indication, because I wasn't aware beforehand of how this format was going to work. So to help me focus and answer your question, could you narrow it down slightly for me, please?
Yes, so we're going to come on. I think Lord Dubbs is going to put a question shortly about the wider issue of age assessment. At the moment, I'm particularly interested in both the broader process. So what is it like for that young person, how they're treated, how they're supported, and then other issues that your experience would consider to be relevant, which might be to do with education, it might be to do with healthcare, it might be to do with circumstances behind how they've made the journey, where they're being housed, who they're being housed with. It's as broad a question really as possible, but we will get into more detail about age assessments in a moment.
Well, I suppose what I would answer is that, you know, from a social work perspective and from the British Association of Social Workers perspective, but also from a local authority perspective, which both myself and Sarah Hammond, I'm sure, you know, can speak of, and others here, you know, what should happen to the young people is that they are accommodated under Section 20 of the Children Act by the local authority. You know, what the border agency does, I don't think it's really correct for me to comment on. But of course, the gold standard is for all children to be placed in foster care when they arrive without their customary caregiver. And that's what I would say, you know, we should be focusing on today. And we, of course, all understand the shortage of placements and the situation as it has had to be. Incredibly unfortunate with local authorities not having adequate placements for the children. And I think that's probably something which the meeting would, or the round table would want to go on to discuss. I'm not sure it's appropriate for me to say any more now. I mean, I could, but I'm not really sure that you'd want me to sort of, you know, hold the floor, so to speak.
That's enormously helpful. And just an observation, you mentioned perhaps not feeling it appropriate to comment on the border force.
Yes.
Whilst, you know, clearly we have the opportunity to take evidence from others as well, it's really useful to hear from your perspective whether that has had a constructive impact, whether young people's reflections on how they've been dealt with when they're, for example, first lodging their asylum claim, the questions they've been asked, has that been a constructive experience for them? Has it been helpful? Or has it had a negative impact? Because that then enables us to ask more informed questions elsewhere.
I think over the many, many years that the Border Force has been involved in this, and the feedback that we've had from young people is it's been tremendously varied. You know, on occasions they have had, you know, very, very kind and humanitarian reception, but there have also been, you know, many occasions when that hasn't been appropriate. They haven't been treated with the care and kindness and consideration as children that they should have received. And of course, you know, the Border Force are put in this very, very difficult position of having to decide on just a visual glance as to whether or not they're children or not. And the feedback that we've had for many, many children who've been age disputed is that they found that deeply, deeply distressing. And we know that many children have been placed in adult accommodation and adult services.
Thank you very much indeed, Karen. If I may, I'll move to Sarah Hammond. Sarah, perhaps I could ask you for your thoughts next.
So just for those of you that don't know me, I'm Sarah Hammond. I'm Director of Integrated Children's Services at Kent County Council. I've been at the council for a very long time, but I've been doing work with asylum-seeking children, young people since 2013. So I speak not just from a perspective of quite a long period of time from my experience. I'm a social worker. I lead social work services here in Kent, but particularly from a service which I'm sure you'll all be aware has been at the real coalface of managing new arrivals into the UK, and not just in terms of total numbers, but in terms of volume at any one time of children, young people arriving in one local authority. So as Karen says, the legislation that receives children into care is the 1989 Children Act, section 20, which wasn't designed with this cohort, children, young people in mind. And I would certainly, you know, be asking, as people have heard me speak publicly, about a review of the function of section 20 and the 89 Act. And whether this is the best way to receive these young people into the country. But in terms of what happens is, a young person will arrive at Dover and will declare themselves to be a child or young person. It's usually pretty obvious that they are seeking asylum because they will have come through clandestine routes, either through lorries or on boats. Slightly less clandestine, obviously, because the boats can be seen. But up until 2 years ago, the only form of entry that we were familiar with was concealed in lorries. The small boats is a very new experience for us, and we will be alerted by border force colleagues that they have a young person in their care. They will do preliminary discussions and checks, and actually very recently there's been a review of services down at the KIU, the Kent Intake Unit, I think by Her Majesty's Inspector of Prisons, and overwhelmingly both the adults and the young people who are received down in Dover spoke very positively about the care and the consideration that they've been given by border force officers, and generally that is our experience. So we'll be alerted and then we'll send a social worker down to the docks to collect the young person. And for us here in Kent, we will place any young person under 16 or claiming to be under 16 in foster care, and for 16 and 17-year-olds, they will go into our reception centre. I have to say to you that about 97% of new arrivals are young men, boys. So when we do get the very, very small number of girls, and we do get some girls, then we have either foster care for them or sort of semi-independent supported accommodation. So in normal times, and we're not in normal times at the moment, but in normal times, that young person will be allocated a social worker, and they will start the processes of looking after young people like any other looked after child. So they'll have looked after children health reviews, they'll have statutory reviews with their independent reviewing officer, their educational needs will be assessed, and they will have personal education plans, everything that is relevant and requires to be done and for and with young people who come into care. That will be the case for these young people as well. For the boys that go into the reception centre in business as normal times, and I'll talk to you a little bit about what's happening here in Kent and why we've had to do what we've had to do. But they will spend somewhere between 4 and 6 weeks in one of our reception centres where they'll be assessed. That will include an age assessment. I know we're going to come on to that later, but it will be a needs assessment, and then they'll move out into the community in shared accommodation, supported shared accommodation out in the community, which is accommodation that we commission, the council commissions it themselves. And then I suppose the truth is that they are in a waiting game, so we will be walking alongside them, so to speak, whilst their immigration status is determined. There are delays in that system. That delay causes a great deal of anxiety and distress, but the volumes are such that I think it's a very challenging issue. I can't really speak to the reasons why there are delays, but there are definitely delays in decisions being made. And then, of course, our duties don't stop when these young people become adults. They then move into the care leavers service. And we then have extended duties up to the age of 25. And it is, a really significant part of the work, because very often these young people spend a relatively short period of time as looked after children. Overwhelmingly, they are 16 and 17. We have more 17-year-olds than we do 16-year-olds come in at 17. So they'll spend a very short period of time as a child in care, sometimes as little as 13 weeks. But that in of itself triggers care leaver duties. And so we then have the period between 18 and 25 when local authorities remain responsible for the welfare and well-being, as they do for any other care leaver, of course, because the duties extend in exactly the same way at the moment. I'm mindful I've done a lot of talking, but I do just want to say that we have been part of the National Transfer Scheme since its initiation in 2016. We were part of the working group that wanted this to happen. It's really very fragile. It requires mandation. That's nothing new coming from Kent. We require the transfer of young people to be mandated to other local authorities. It's still voluntary, and Kent remains significantly over its 0.07 quota in terms of the number of young people you ask that we are due to be supporting in relation to our overall child population. So I'll stop there, and I'm really happy to take questions, but hopefully that's given a bit of a flavour, a really quick run through of what would normally happen.
Well, thank you very much, Sarah. If I may, I'd just like to ask you to expand on a point that you raised there before I bring in Tom and Tom and Daniel in just a moment. You mentioned about the mandation of young people moving to other local authority areas. Now, in my background in Hillingdon, the same challenge as Kent faces of being above that 0.7% figure remains, and has been the case for a long time. My understanding is that although the Home Office would have the power to require other local authorities to sorry, if I may, the question is, although the Home Office appears to have the power to require other local authorities to take in young people, it does not have the power to require young people to move. And certainly in the case of Hillingdon, one of the issues with the National Transfer Scheme was young people saying, I'd much rather stay here where I'm in a community that's become familiar, where there are other young people who've been through the same experience as me, rather than move to another area. And their legal advocates were essentially saying to the local authority, you cannot make them go. I'm just interested in your perspective on that issue, because clearly for young people themselves, having the choice and the fact that the operation of law of the 89 Children Act means legally they are the responsibility of the local authority where they arise, whether you have a view about that, or that's something you've explored.
So we haven't had the challenge that you've described overall, and I think there's two reasons for that. We don't have the range of diverse communities that perhaps some of our London Borough colleagues have. And we do have a growing diverse community, but I don't think that young people, when they arrive here, their aim is to stay in rural Kent. I think that's the first thing I would say. Sorry, David, what was your second question? There was something about, had we found that was the case?
Yes, well, I was asking whether you had that challenge back from young people or their advocates, and perhaps secondly, whether you explored the legalities of that, because certainly the position, as I understand it from the Hillingdon background, is that if a young person says, no, I wish to stay here, that is the end of it, really.
Yeah, so one, we haven't had that volume of young people asking, if at all. I think the way we arrange our services, where young people, and as I've already repeated, we're talking predominantly about 16 and 17-year-old young boys, young men. They will be in our reception centres. So they will not have put down roots, if you like, in the local community in the way that you've just described, David. You know, they will be living in the reception centres along with their friends and, you know, sort of people that they've met along the way. But actually, in terms of being embedded in a community in the way that you've just described, that tends not to happen. And we wouldn't move young people out into independent or supported accommodation in a community in that way if they were due to be transferred. So if they were on the transfer list. I mean, the other thing that, you know, certainly since 2016, we have been very clear on reception, that transfer is what we'll be seeking. So it's not that somebody's been living with us for 6 months and then we say, oh, we're going to put you on the transfer list. That's not how it works. But perhaps I should have been a bit clear about that at the beginning, that because we are always over our 0.07%, anybody who arrives with us, well, the first thing we actually ask is, do you have any friends or family here in the UK that you want to connect up with and we can help you with? That's the first question. But then we'll be talking about transfer and the temporary nature of being in Kent.
So if I may, I'm just going to invite Thomas and Daniel to comment, and then I'll bring in Lord Dubs and Alex Cunningham, if I may. So I could ask if either of you wishes to share your thoughts. Okay, not to worry. In that case, perhaps Lord Dubs is next on my list, followed by Alex Cunningham. So Lord Dubs.
Right, I think David, are we still on age assessment, or have we moved to the more general issue? Because I'd like to ask a question about each of them.
We've started with the more general issue about the experience of young people arriving, but I know we are going to come on specifically to the issue of age assessments in about 5 minutes. So we're going to ask some more detailed questions about that.
Right. Well, may I just deal with the young people arriving? I think you said when you described the process. I think it was Sarah Hammond who described the process. Are you finding it difficult? See, my understanding is that Kent has a lot of pressure because of the geography of Kent. Are you finding it very difficult to get local authorities? I mean, what is the problem? Is it lack of offers by local authorities? Is it lack of pressure from the Home Office? How can one get a bit more movement into this?
Nice to see you again, Lord Dubs. I know we've met before.
Yes.
Fundamentally, it's the oh gosh, I'm going to use my language very, very carefully, but the inability or the unwillingness of other local authorities to take young people in. It's as simple. Now, there'll be lots of reasons that they'll give. They don't have placements, they don't have social workers. There's myriads of reasons why other local authorities don't wish to take young people in. But that fundamentally, that is the crux of it. And I have to be, you know, really honest and say it is not through any lack of effort of the NTS team in the Home Office. Far from it. They are really, you know, working extremely hard to try and get placements, and they, you know, they have got some placements. To be fair, you know, this year I think around 400 young people have moved into other local authority placements, some directly from Kent and some from the care of the Home Office when we found ourselves having to shut our doors because we simply couldn't take in any more children. So it isn't through lack of effort on the part of the National Transfer team, in my view. It is simply that other local authorities, for their own reasons, are unwilling and unable to take young people.
May I ask a supplementary then? At present, how many children do you have who are, as it were, more than you can cope with? What numbers are we talking about that you're seeking to get a transfer for?
Okay, so in Kent, our quote, our NTS quota is 240. I've currently just got under 400 children. So I'm looking for places. Do the maths is very simple. I'm looking for over 100 places. I've also got nearly 1,300 care leavers. So that's the other point to say, is that the National Transfer Scheme isn't there to move care leavers. It's only there for children under the age of 18. So as soon as a young person becomes 18, in that waiting time between arriving and waiting to be transferred, if they turn 18, then they have to stay here in Kent.
Thank you.
Thank you, Lord Seb. So I'm bringing Alex Cunningham, and then
thanks very much, David.
And Dylan Hubbard.
I always think in terms of, sorry, I always think in terms of, you know, how can we do better? I've heard criticism there that the 89 Act is no longer, well, it doesn't apply to the sort of young people that are coming into the system, whether it's by train or small boat. So I'm interested to know, what is it, legislation we need to change? Is it procedures we need to change? Is it attitudes? You know, what do we need to change? So that's one of my main questions. The other one is around, well, you talked a little bit about dispersal, and I'm wondering, you know, the reasons behind the fact that this isn't working, because I know that authorities in the northeast of England, they take large numbers of asylum seekers where housing is much less expensive, but don't take so many children, although I know that my own local authority is going to be taking quite a cohort of Afghan children, but they come through a different system. So I'm interested in that. I'm also interested in the transition time. What happens at transition from children to adult services? And Sarah alluded to the you know, the fact that the children are still under care for into their mid-20s. But of course, some of these young people, they might turn 18 and decide, I'm off to the city, or I'm off to, you know, where there is a community of my nationality, and they just go and they then probably fall off the radar. So I'm interested to know what we do about that as well.
Well, thank you, Alex. I'm just going to give Luam, Dylan and Maya the opportunity to contribute as well, because I know they've been waiting patiently and have something to say about exactly these particular issues. So Luam, I can see you've got your hand up.
Yeah, hello.
Hello.
Everyone, thank you. So apologize, I cannot have my camera on. Can you hear me okay? Okay, yeah. So
yes.
Myself, I'm a care leaver. I came 2015, and then overall, I can say, to be honest, I had really good support from my local, from the children's service, as well as from the 18 plus when I turned 18. However, I have to say, when it comes to age assessment, it wasn't good. There is no things that I can improve my age, because back home we don't have birth certificate, and then they were aware of that. So to go through all this emotional, I had to do assessment. It was like about 4 months age assessment. Plus, I don't have my home office stats. You know, I'm new, the language, the culture, new environment. It's just too much to think. I can imagine for these people who go through that, and I think there need to be a lot of work on it. And I'm okay. They could do the assessment, because that's the only way it can be. That's the only way they can know. But I think while they're doing it, they need to be supportive. They need to be. They need to consider how the young person will feel as well, you know, that emotional. We did all that journey, and then you come to this place, we do all the questions with the police when we arrive anyway. And then when you get to your place, all these questions around, a lot of professionals on the table. It's a horrific experience I had. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing that. It's really useful to hear from somebody who's been through it. Dylan, and then Rishan. I know you had your hand up earlier on and then dropped off for a second, so I can see your back. I'll give you the opportunity, and I'll ask Sarah to respond as well. So Dylan.
Hi. As a foster carer who takes in new arrivals, just after what Sarah's been saying, just to support, because the NTS scheme isn't mandated, because people don't have to take the young people, it's quite distressing to support young people on arrival knowing that it's short. They're very displaced, they're very distressed, they need a lot of support initially, and being a carer in Kent who knows that they're going to be moving on soon, and you're not able to give them all the support they need and all the help and advice, and they feel rejected very quickly. They're very confused about why they're going to have to move. And I think it's really important for you to get this NTS scheme running in a better way that supports young people on arrival, because at the moment it causes massive distress. And we've had 8 young people arrive, and I've had them moved on from 3 weeks in placement to 6 months. And after 6 months, that young person was really connected here, and he was always aware he was on the list, but they stay distressed. They're still in touch with us a year after moving because they connected with us on arrival. And we have to sort this out. We have to get people in long-term placements when they arrive, and not put them in short-term places where they know they're not going to stay. I just think it's really important to get this, to get other areas across the country involved. And I don't understand why the government can't do more and can't make that happen. I think young people are very afraid of authority when they arrive. I know there's a few on the call, and the experience in the port is difficult. They find it very hard to open up and trust anybody. And that just continues for longer because of the lack of placements opening up across the country. We're not helping.
Thank you very much. That's a very clear point there about the availability. So Rishan, I'll give you the opportunity then, Maya and Sarah, and then we are going to move on to the next section, which is specifically around age assessments. So Rishan.
Thank you for the opportunity. I just want to thank Dylan for her empathy, because that's sort of a person who would work close to the young people instead like of this list of ticking and what should be done and not done, without like having the experience to speak with a young person and have that feeling. As Luam said, she's was in foster family. I was as well when I came to here. I was placed with the foster family, and I had really nice experience, and I'm still in contact with them, and I still love my foster family because they're really nice people. Were really nice to me. That's made me who I am in here in this country. But in terms of the authority, to be honest, I didn't have that kind of support. I always find out there's something new that I suppose entitled to it. And what I hear from Sarah, there's all these kind of nice things that should be done for the young people, but I didn't have that experience in terms of coming to here, or my friends as well. Like, I've been placed in foster family, and they're really, as I said again, they're nice people, but some of my friends, they've been placed in a shared home. And imagine someone comes to a new country, have no access to understand anything, and lack of language, being placed in a house where they can't speak with the people around them. Some of the young people, they didn't have a heater in the houses, but they didn't know how to speak to the landlord or what to say. So it's still like all this, we think that's, oh, should this take the young person being in placement, always they are in the houses, or they are in the shared home with some young people. Okay, that's so good. It's not, we're not talking about numbers, we're talking about like human, like that need to understand what the experience they've been lived to. So as been mentioned, like when the age from 16 to so, either with the foster family, but the majority, the girls that have been in a foster family, and I understand why that's been done like that. But when it comes to the boys, they don't know how to cook, they don't know how to speak with other people. And as I said, some of my friends, they would like in the winter, like without any heater, but nobody's like gone there and then asked them, how is everything? Some of the young people would have all the instruction, like if there's a fire and so on, but not the majority. So I feel like they should be trained before like move them to the shared house so they can understand how things to live. But this hasn't been done to the young people. It's always like, oh, okay, they are subtle and then that's it, but that's not the case. But when it comes to the age assessment, I know it's the next question, but it's always there's problem comes to it. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Thanks very much indeed, Rishan. Hands are now appearing. Clearly this has got people thinking and wanting to have something to say. So I'm going to ask Maya, Tom and Jimmy, please can I ask you to keep your remarks brief because we need to get on to the issue of age assessment and there's probably quite a lot to say about that.
Sure.
But Tom's dropped off, so Maya, yep, there you are.
Yeah, I mean, if we have to keep it brief, then I'll just caveat it with it will be wholly inadequate to try and summarise any of these issues. I think I co-chair a coalition of over 60 organisations who have been raising concerns about the system as it stands for a long time, but increasingly, and are currently raising extensive concerns about the changes that are being brought forward in the Nationality of Borders Bill. And so I think it's important to acknowledge that as a coalition, we see that the changes that are being brought forward as an unprecedented attack against the rights of children going through the asylum process. I do have to say that if we want to think about positive examples of how unaccompanied minors have good experiences of the system, it's when that they have access to the full protections as a looked after child under the Children's Act. And so I'm really concerned by the suggestions that have already been made in this call of whether or not Section 20 is appropriate for these children, and any suggestions of the rights that they have as children being diluted. I think that is extremely worrying. Already we're seeing children being accommodated under detention powers by the Home Office in hotels in Kent, outside of the looked after children, out after the looked after child legislative framework of care. And suggestions that we're hearing and have been mentioned already in this call about legislation being pushed forward that will limit the care that care leavers who don't have status will receive. And so the kind of these kind of suggestions and proposals entirely contrary, I think, to any good examples of when when it works well for children going through the asylum process when they're separated. And so if I only have a few minutes, that's the kind of.
Thanks, Maya. And just to emphasise, Basil would be pleased to hear if people have points either they don't wish to raise on this call or that they wish to explain in more detail. Do please put those submissions in writing. Jimmy and then Tom, I'm going to bring you in next and then we'll move on. Jimmy.
Hi, thanks for the opportunity. Very quickly, I want to echo what Maya's just said in terms of concerns around rights of the child and treating them as children first. I work for a charity that works with 16, 17-year-old unaccompanied people for the past 13 years. Our experiences have been, most of them talk about being treated with suspicion, finding it really difficult to trust, not really being treated with dignity, especially in the early months. I want to echo the comments that Luan made about the impact on emotional well-being when the processes are drawn out, over several months, especially around age assessment, and also the inconsistencies from one authority to another, and maybe even sometimes from one. Sadly, sometimes this happens from one social worker to another social worker. And then these kind of instances have significant impact on their ability to be, ultimately teenagers and children and be who they are and where they are meant to be, and then to settle in and build on opportunities to have a good future. There's lots to unpack there, and I'm aware of time, so there's just some quick thoughts, headlines.
Thank you very much, and then Tom.
Thank you for preparing it. Just means a lot for all of us. I'm just going to raise two things here, like for the first arrival situations and then the solution that I'm thinking and we were discussing about. The first one is the first arrivals. It's I don't know how to tell you. It's very traumatic Like if I just put myself as an example, I was in a fridge for 2-3 hours, and it was hard to get the police coming there and to open that, and then it was like scolding, and it was this kind of criminalization, you know what I'm saying? It just stays you inside like for long. So that I think if you can evaluate that for us and then just put some measurements so that, you know, especially underage going to prison until they are they can be underage, you know, until their age is proved, even if they are telling they are less than 18 years. So I think check that out for us, please. And I feel like there's a bigger solution for us here, like connecting the community, connected with the community. My first impression, we had like a couple of lessons, like a couple of visitings where I stayed, and we've been told a couple of things. And what I remember was like it was very precise. It's not clear for me. The lesson we gave it just make me feel myself solitude, not belong in the community, because it was like don't touch, you know, the girls, and it was kind of like that kind of thing. It wasn't deeper. It doesn't make me pursue to connect with the community and forward myself. Otherwise, it just make me to don't touch anything. Just you know, that was very hard for us as well. So it will make things very difficult to, you know, keep forward for any person. But I feel like I've never seen a poster advertisement. I don't know if there is like a community participation that if you are really pushing into the communities to participate in helping, you know, because that helped. For me, I had a mentor, and since then I became family actually with them. And then I call them my English mom and dad. So I think that connection really means a lot for us. Thank you very much.
Oh, thanks, Tom. Again, it's enormously valuable to hear from people who've been through the system themselves. We're going to move on to the issue of age assessments, and I appreciate there are a couple of people waiting to speak and have the opportunity to do so in just a moment. But perhaps we have 3 questions, one which each parliamentarian was going to put. Mine is around, is there a most effective way to legally determine age? But perhaps if I ask my 2 parliamentary colleagues to put their questions, and then I can bring the respondents in to pick up all of those issues around age assessment. So Alex Cunningham, you're next on my list.
Yes, indeed. I suppose you know, the bottom line is how can things be better? How could the system be improved as far as determining age is concerned?
And Lord Dubs.
Yeah, I had a rather distressing experience told me by a woman who was a foster mother of a Syrian girl, and she went for age assessment to Luna House in Croydon, and the foster mother was not allowed to be with the Syrian girl, nor was anybody else, and they were just Home Office officials, and the girl was absolutely distressed and in tears at the end of it. Now, if a young person of that age is up on a criminal charge, they would surely have a parent, a guardian, or a solicitor, or the lot there. And yet, in this instance, the Syrian girl was given no adult on her side at all, and was subjected to some very difficult questioning. I hope that's not the norm, but it was certainly a very upsetting experience for the child itself. So, you know, I wonder how this can be done in a more sensitive manner, because it is a distressing experience, and so much may hang on the outcome of it. And we're talking about people who aren't familiar with Luna House and the Home Office and so on, and yet in a different culture they have to sort of cope with very difficult questioning. That's my question here.
Well, thank you, Lord Dubs. Again, a couple of points raised in there. Now, at this point, I'm going to hand the chair over to you, if I may, Lord Dubs, because parliamentary timetable is moving on, I think I'm going to be required to go over to the Chamber of the Commons. But I'll be speaking to Baz. I'll be really interested, particularly in the feedback on these points about age assessment. So thank you very much indeed for participation so far. I found it enormously useful, and I look forward to hearing from Lord Debs. I know, Alex Cunningham, I think you have to go at 4, possibly for a similar commitment. So
indeed, I have. Yes.
That's correct. Okay, understood. So Lord Debs, I'll hand the chair to you and step away. Thank you very much indeed.
Okay, right. Well, thank you. So where are we now? Answers to those comments. Who wants to go next? Well, I don't know where to start. Perhaps Sarah, you would start first, would you?
Thank you.
As you're at the cold face, sir.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. I just want to go back so that I'm not misquoted what I said. What I actually said was that the 1989 Act was not designed with this cohort of children and young people in mind. It was never brought together with a view that it would look after unaccompanied asylum-seeking children. That's what I said. So I don't want to be misquoted by anybody.
Sorry, Sarah,
in regards to whether I think it's suitable.
Sorry, Sarah, I can't hear you.
Is tied in with the way in which, at the moment, we look after those people who are children, i.e. under the age of 18, and those people who are adults over the age of 18. And one of the things that I would like to suggest is to look to colleagues in Europe, where actually a national service which receives and looks after unaccompanied minors, where actually age starts to matter a lot less. Are you under 18 or are you just over 18? The whole issue around the age and why we have to carry out age assessments is because the way our legislation is set up is such that you receive a certain sort of service only if you are a child and not if you are a vulnerable 18 or 19-year-old young person. And for me, that is at the heart of what needs to look and be different. And actually, in many ways, that age issue, that borderline issue, could fall away if actually we could think about all of this very, very differently and have a national service that looked after both minors and young people just over their majority, whilst their asylum applications were being determined. So that's, yeah. Is there any way, a foolproof way? No, there isn't. At the moment, it totally relies on social workers interviewing questions. Some of my social workers have become experts in geopolitical affairs because they've had to understand what happened when Aleppo fell. Where were you? What were you doing? That's the extent to which social workers have to undertake questioning and assessments when they're asked to be giving a judgment on age. It's close to it, you know, it's such a difficult thing to be doing. But the way the system is set up at the moment, we provide services for children, and that means under 18s. And just by default, therefore, there has to be some mechanism by which age is determined if an individual isn't able to evidence that themselves. So I'll stop there.
Okay, thank you. There was a question that came in from Alex Cunningham about wanting to know more about how a national system would operate. But can we hold that one for a minute? I've got so many hands up. I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 8 hands up. So let's go through them. Can you keep your contributions as brief as possible, consistent with the importance of the subject? Okay, let me go next to Rishan. Would you like to come in, Rishan, please?
Yeah, thank you so much. In terms of the ages, there is a sound in the background. It's not me, but I don't know whose mic on. Can you hear me now?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. In terms of the ages assessment, the way if you're looking at me, you would think that I'm 15 or 16, but I'm 23, and that's kind of the issue that always like happen to the young people when they come to here. Once the young person like is really tall or have a mustache, they think that is, oh no, he's not a younger person. He shouldn't be under the age, and that's some of the issue we had at all my friends. And by just doing the age assessment wrong is kind of all everything in terms of education, in terms of housing, in terms of all entitled. Like one of my friends, because he's a big and he's tall, he couldn't go to school, but he's under the age. But the assessment that is being done for him, it was like, no, you're not that kind of age. So he didn't have a chance to go to school or to go to college just because he fallen under that wrong thing. And one of the things I feel like the lack of knowledge in terms of the background, like if, for example, if you see Vietnams or see young girls from Eritrea, we really small, like in terms of the size and the baby face that we have it. So this issue, they don't consider it, or they don't know, like, but just because of seeing that person, that's how the judgment been falling to it. And kind of really annoying and disappointing just because someone judged you because the way you look. It's kind of have negative experience in the UK, because you can't go to college and you can't access any of the, if you go to college, if you are 20 or something, you can't do GCSE because you have to have a course. So they will not accept you, especially if in Canterbury College. Some of my friends, because of this age assessment, they couldn't go to do GCSE or any kind of course. And we go back again to the university in all entitlement in terms of the housing, and you can't be in a shared house, you have to work by yourself. And again, we go back to the point that you don't have your statement. So how are you going to work and then provide all this issue, like rent a house, or you have to do all things by yourself? But when we look to the under the age, we kind of like feel more empathy to them, and I understand why, but it's still that kind of wrong things can fall all things to other people. Thank you.
We're going to run out of time if we're not careful, so thank you for the contribution. If we can keep the contribution as short as possible, it would make my life easier. Now let's go next to Delane Hubbard, please.
Hi, just quickly, the Home Office also assessed young people that I've looked after, and when I have a local social worker assessing age, the process goes quite well. They've got to know our young people, and it's a person-centred process. The Home Office team are quite brutal. They don't allow us to support them through it, and this system doesn't work. The young people are extremely distressed after, and that really needs looking at. It's a horrendous experience, as other people have said. It's a lot of pressure on local social workers to do it, but it feels like it's more person-centred and child-centred when it's done in-house and locally. Yeah, I could say a lot more, but we haven't got time.
Thank you for that. Can we go on to Emily, please?
Hi, thank you. So I'm actually a social worker myself, so I'm at the coalface doing these assessments. I think I wanted to talk about Alex Cunningham's question about how could things be better with the current process that we've got. I think one of the things that we do in my local authority, which is Merton, is challenging the Home Office straight away about whether this assessment is actually necessary, using our observations as social workers, talking to foster carers and other young people, in that young person's life to think about whether we need to do the assessment. I think another thing we can do to make these assessments better is really being multi-agency, as I said, speaking to different professionals involved, really taking the time to get to know the young person and their lives before making that assessment. I think what Rishan said as well about these processes being very tick box, I think good practice is to have a separate social worker from your allocated worker to be doing that age assessment. You know, as social workers, we're corporate parents for our young people. It wouldn't be normal to expect a parent to be doing an assessment of their child. We really need to be thinking about their rights and how we keep that relationship with that young person. I also have some worries that I want to raise about future age assessments and what they may look like. I think as a social worker, I've got some real concerns about suggestions around bone scanning or measuring body parts. I think as a social worker, that's completely unethical for me to be doing, to be asking a young person to do that. And I think that's a really re-traumatizing process that we don't want our young people to be doing. I've also got concerns about assessments being outsourced to the Home Office, about the conflicts of interest there, and about any suggestions around short assessments. We really need the time to understand these young people, to help them talk through the difficult journeys. They're speaking about their families, they're speaking about their lives before they came here. We really need the time to get to know them and to understand them, to make that assessment of their age.
Thank you very much for that. Right, I'm going through the names. Next person is Luam. If I got it right, Luam, please.
Yeah, thank you, everyone. Yeah, it's relevant. What I would say is quite relevant with everyone else. What everyone have already said. So in terms of the age assessment, yeah, sometimes they just guess. Really, they make assumption over someone through what they can see, maybe their body, as Rishan said, or they're tall or they're short. They got baby face. I think, or sometimes like how they talk. In some cultures, in my culture, we don't talk. I cannot have like straight eye contact to my mom while I'm talking to her, because it's just because I have to discipline, I have to look down. But if you look down, then they said you are lying here, and I'm like, I'm not lying, but that's how I've been brought up. That's how my family, you know, they call it discipline. I don't agree with it now, but back home, that's how we talk to adult. I cannot talk to, I cannot stand the talk to adult like when I'm looking at their eye contact properly. I think there is a lot of things they need to understand cultural behavior. How do they talk young people back home? You know, they need to understand. They just come from their own world, and then they don't understand these young people's experience, how they brought up, how it affects them when they're talking to people, especially if you don't know the people that you're talking to. It's overwhelming. So I think there's a lot of work need to be done. And then also, they don't have evidence even to say that, you know, 18. Sometimes they say, oh, you guys, you say you are under 18, but you know 18, but they don't have evidence to support that as well. I think they need to be careful. Local professionals, they need to be careful what they're saying as well. They make assumptions based on what they can see.
Thank you very much. Jimmy, please.
Thank you. I just want to add a couple of bits really. One is how there's a consistent drain of expertise and knowledge with social workers moving on, and essentially having to retrain people consistently, and therefore having very different approaches around how age assessments are done. You know, to my mind, it doesn't, I don't know if this is the case, but if it's not, it does not make sense why this is not already part of the curriculum for qualification around social work. And establishing that right at the beginning of their training journey. That, you know, that is something I think should be considered. Alongside that, I think, you know, there hasn't been any consideration around the knowledge of impact of trauma on development and what that means for how it is reflected on physical attributes of a person. And that needs to be taken into account. This is some of the experiences that we have seen with the young people that we have worked with for the last 13 years.
Thank you for that. Now, let's just see who's next. Got a little hands up here. Thomas, please. Thomas, are you muted, Thomas? I don't have my Thomas. Well, sorry if we've lost you for a bit, Thomas. Let's just see. There was somebody else before we. I think that's all, is it? Anybody else got a hand up for this? Sorry, Enrica.
I'm here.
Oh, okay, Thomas. You go, Thomas, and then Enrica. Okay, the last two.
Sorry about that. It's about I feel like there is a limited contact between the deciders and us. Like it was like a couple of hours for me, just see me and like, you know, that judging me, all that. And I feel like I agree with the idea where just if it would be foster parents, if there is a community, then you wouldn't feel the pressure or the the judge or the thing. Especially if there is a question, then it should take more time, more contact to decide the age. And there is, especially in my culture, we have like you grow up like at year 7. After you're 7, you grow up in our culture. So we just tend to behave like mature people, and it is very difficult for us when we come here to get judged by what you behave like. You respect people, that's why you don't look into the eyes straight, so you just bow down, as it's mentioned. I think if you look at the contact, it's a very limited contact. Within 2 hours, 4 hours, you can't tell the person's age. I don't think it's very easy to do that. Yeah, that's what I wanted to say. So sorry and thank you.
Okay, thank you. Now I've got two more on this section. That's Rika and then Karen, please. Was it Rivka? Is it Rivka? Yes.
Hi, yeah, Rivka. I'll try and be really brief. Just for people who don't know who I am, I'm Rivka. I'm the policy officer at Greater Manchester Immigration Aid Unit. So we support hundreds of unaccompanied asylum-seeking children, many of which who've been age disputed. And I don't want to repeat what's already been said, but just to say we're like very much of the opinion that you can't really assess age. You certainly can't assess age scientifically. So we're really worried about the proposals in the bill. I just wanted to draw attention quickly to what we're seeing at the moment and just the examples of some like really bad practice in terms of age assessments. So it actually relates to the national transfer scheme, as we were talking about earlier, because one issue for local authorities in our region, the Northwest, has been that they found themselves unexpectedly with a lot of children who have been put into hotels as adults, who have come from Kent and who might have had a short age assessment at Kent intake unit or an eyes-on assessment by the Home Office and been accommodated with adults. And then when local authorities in this region see them, most of them, they decide, well, they don't even need to have an age assessment because they're obviously children. Obviously, that's incredibly traumatic for them. It also messes up the numbers with an NTS for local authorities. And the kind of things we've been seeing that children have been reporting is being lined up, not given any opportunity to show documents which show their age, not given any opportunity to explain how old they are or explain their story, and then obviously being dispersed into adult accommodation. So I just want to draw attention to how very, very distressing that is for those young people. And obviously the bill is threatening to make that a lot worse. So yeah, I just wanted to draw attention to that, really.
Thank you very much. And now Karen, please.
Yes, I really just kind of want to support my social work colleagues here and say that, if you look at the standards for registration of social workers, the best interests of children are what really we should be looking at, and looking at how we establish and maintain relationships of trust. We're very used to doing multi-professional, multi-agency assessments, and that is absolutely what any work to do with allocating a date of birth has to be for social workers, and that's really the policy that BASWA puts forward. And I really do, value hearing the voice of young people today who say that they are finding what actually is being undertaken very, very difficult. And we have to be very careful not to re-traumatize these children and young people.
An awful lot of ideas came through in that session. I hope we're keeping a good note of them because they're useful, as well as some useful points on the chat line. I was going to move on to the last section of this particular event. Sorry, Daniel, did I miss you out, Daniel? Your hand's still up.
Yes, I just want to say quickly about the age assessment. I was going through the same, like they do age assessment when I came in 2015. So I think at that time it was okay, I would say, but compared to what happened in the last this year and last year, I've spoken with many different people, my friends, and so how my experience and their experience at the moment. So what happened at the moment is once when they arrive in Dover, so directly they tell them, they assume sometimes like the refugee telling the not true. So they just tell them, nah, this is not true. So they just tell them like, this is your age. So basically they just give them age assessment quickly in very few minutes. So that caused a lot of problems. And also because of let's say you are 17 and they give you 25 or 27. So you have to live in a sharing house or whatever. So the process, for example, you have to find a solicitor who can take your case, for example, to apply to claim asylum in the UK. So with this kind of stuff, some of the young people, they're not strong enough to cope with these issues and the stress. So that causes a lot of mental health and depression. So I think what they do, the Home Office at the moment, is completely wrong. And I don't know what else we can do, to support these young people, and also at least to do the right things. Thank you.
We've had a good go at that. We've now come to the last session, a little bit late. The last session, which is really settling in the UK, and I'd like to bring as many people as possible for that. But David Simmonds had a question which he was not able to stay here to answer. So I'm going to put his question. Off the back of the fresh money announced in the budget for children's social care reform and expand the provision in children's homes, how can we best utilise this funding to improve the experience of vulnerable children and in particular unaccompanied minors? In other words, David Simmonds is saying there's some extra money about a bit. How can we best use that money to improve the experience for vulnerable children and in particular unaccompanied minors? Now, who wants to comment on that? Because there are other questions as well. Let me add my question, which is really how can we improve the well-being and long-term opportunities for unaccompanied refugee-seeking children? And then Alex Cunningham had a question. We all know young people often face difficulties during the transition from being an unaccompanied asylum-seeking child to an adult. What mechanism could we put in place to help smooth this transition? All those questions are about how to facilitate the way in which young people who've come into the system, how they can be helped to move through it and have better long-term opportunities. Right, the hands are shooting up. Okay, let's start with Maya.
Thank you. I'll keep it brief. I think that many of us have raised the kind of need for unaccompanied minors to have full access to the rights under the Children's Act. Even where that does happen, the system as it works when the immigration control is prioritised, we see that children experiencing the system, transitioning through the system at its worst as abusive. RMCC has been raising concerns about the high number of suicides amongst asylum-seeking children and former asylum-seeking children who are now care leavers. Darrow Project, who's one of our members, have been investigating this and have identified 13 young people who were asylum-seeking children who have committed suicide in the last 5 years. But we think this is just the tip of the iceberg because of a lack of data on the issue. But this issue is huge and needs a really thorough investigation and assessment and attention. It's not something that we can answer like this, but I do feel clear that if it's not given that attention, more children and young people will take their own lives because of the hostility and the pressures of the system. That's me. Thank you.
Could I just before I go to the next person, Maya, could I just ask you if you could elaborate a little bit? You're talking about the whole experience for children, in terms of the pressures on them, or is there anything in particular that you want to put your finger on?
I suppose it's the way that the social care system and the immigration process intersect, and the needs of these children and young people being neglected so that immigration processes can be prioritised. So the way the children are being treated when they're arriving at the moment and being accommodated in hotels, the way that children are being treated by social workers at times who are suspicious of what children might tell them because of the rhetoric coming from the Home Office that asylum seekers are liars. We're seeing extraordinary delays on children and young people's cases, and the mental health impact that is happening on these children and young people is devastating. GMIAU have published really excellent reports on this, and it's really devastating to read. But yeah, it's really complex, and it's impossible for us to be able to summarize those issues in a few minutes, and any attempt to do so, I think, would be really tokenistic.
Thank you for that. Okay, Emily, would you want to go next?
Yeah, I think I really want to echo what Maya's saying about unaccompanied minors' mental health difficulties. I think that's one thing that's really difficult with the transition to being 18. I think what I find as a social worker is when a lot of our young people come in at 17 or 17 and a half, CAMS, Children and Adolescent Mental Health Services, won't take them on because they'll soon turn 18, which then means that we're relying on charities or other NGOs to fill that gap for mental health services before they reach the age to access adult services. So I think if there is funding to be put into mental health services specifically for refugees and asylum-seeking young people at that age where that's a real difficult transition. I think transition as well is also interesting at age 18 in terms of social work, where often young people will move across to having a personal advisor at that time. That transition can be really difficult. They've built up a relationship with their social worker and then they have to move over to a new person. It's about us looking at doing that transition in the best way possible for retaining that relationship. Also, I'm thinking about housing. Often a young person, if they're in foster care at age 18, they might have to move into semi-dependent accommodation. And I think it's recognising that just because they're 18, they're not suddenly an adult and their needs don't change the day they turn 18. It's thinking about how we're really looking at the support that they need and ensuring that if they are going to be moving into semi-independent accommodation, that they're supported with that, or that we're looking at better resources around them staying in foster care under a staying put agreement to ensure that they really keep on having that support up until the age of 18. I think as well, in terms of talking about their mental health, I think one of the real difficulties around that is along a lot of the delays that young people are facing from the Home Office or waiting for NRM decisions. And I think ensuring that they've got good legal representation and local authorities being able to work with advocacy services such as we work with South London Refugee Association, who really support those young people to get good legal representation straight away. So into adulthood, they're not facing more and more delays to their legal claims.
What about next one, Delane, please?
Hi, when a young person arrives, we very quickly try to access online learning and groups, because finding their community quickly is really important, and the charities providing this just need more funding. There's nothing for under 14s anywhere, so the 12-year-olds arriving are very isolated. We've got one local boy who's 11, I believe. There's nothing for him to access, nobody's providing. I think we need a lot more support for all of the people like CRAN, the Refugee Council, the Red Cross, who are helping us as carers keep these young people mentally well when they first arrive, while they wait 6 months to be age assessed. We've got to put more in place, because if we don't find communities quickly, they just feel really isolated. It's difficult.
Luan, please.
Hello, thank you. So thank you, everyone. I just want to say in terms of the transition, when I'm just going to talk from my personal experience, but it will be different for these people who've been independent in accommodation since they come to the UK. So I've been lucky enough to be in foster care. I have really good foundation with my foster care. So the education system is something that needs to change. I think since you hit 18, 19, there is no, you cannot do any course. These young people, they're really determined. Some of them, they want to do, some of them say they want to do doctor, mechanic, but they don't have that opportunity, that support behind them to do, especially when you see someone, they have willingness, they've got determination to be someone, and like seeing them, they lack support, they don't have that opportunity. It's very, very sad to see that. I think the education systems works against us, not working. It doesn't work with our needs. There's a lot of work need to be changed. And then someone also mentioned about mental health, especially the home office process. It's a lot of things that I have to wait 2.5 years. I feel like I don't exist in this place in the UK for 2.5 years. Although I'm here physically, but mentally I wasn't here because I wasn't too sure whether I'd be here. I go to school sometimes. I just feel like, what's the point of going to school? Because what's the point of learning English? Because I'm not going to be here. I would not know what I'm going to do. I think the Home Office need to understand as well. It's not about just waiting for that piece of paper. It's how it would affect you, your life, your well-being, education, your future is based on that paper. I think they need to do a lot of work to improve. I know I appreciate the pressures they have, the waiting list they have, but I think they need to treat really, and also they shouldn't just assume, asylum seeker liar. That's not true, because maybe there are some people, because we are human beings, but there shouldn't be general assumption saying that all asylum seeker is a liar. I don't agree with that.
Thank you for that. And Jimmy, please.
Thank you. I want to build on Luam's point around education and traineeships, apprenticeships. I think there's a significant challenge for those who do not complete level 2 or GCSE in their eligibility towards an apprenticeship or any other transitionary post-vocational or higher education, and the system is stuck against young people. You have 3 or 4 years to compress 10 years of education, and sometimes not even that 3 years, and that's a significant challenge. The other thing I want to highlight really is that I think it needs to be looked at systemically, the whole the impact of the rhetoric and the impact that it has on communities, and therefore the willingness of communities to accept individuals into their community and treat them and not shun them or send racist responses, etc., etc. And I think if we don't address that, then thinking about being settled in the UK, we are being short-sighted, and the impact of that on whether it is work or other aspects. And also listening to the stories and the desires of the young people. A lot of them have significant aspirations and dreams and significant desires of how they want to set up their own life, and if possible, how they can support others as well, whether that is family, community, etc., etc. So we need to take all of that into account when we're thinking about settled in the UK, and actually that really add value to all of us. It's kind of linked to Maya's point, I guess, that this is a big topic, and to compress that into a few minutes, I don't think it will do it justice.
Ishan, did you have your hand up for a new question, or is it still up for last time?
I just want to add in terms of, there's a sound. Can you hear me now? I just want to say something in terms of when we give the young person the support and help, and how things can change for them. For example, me, Luam, and Daniel, we've been in foster care with the foster care family, and we had that kind of support. For example, Luam, she's doing a foundation. She want to be a public health worker, and I'm doing my first year adult nurse in university. The same Daniel, he's the second year doing business. So we find that support, and that's how we became now. Like in terms, when you give the young person opportunity to do something, they will really do good work. And in terms like facing all the challenge, we the three of us, even Tom, I think he's in final, but I can't remember the course. I hope that he's not upset for me. But I'm just saying that the young people, when they have the opportunity, they really do really good work. And we had this kind of opportunity from our foster family and people who around us. But in terms of the system is really hard for other young people. Like they didn't have this opportunity because of the age, again, as we said earlier, and because of all this support. It's not just, oh, this young person go to college and then that's it. So there's other issue they're facing, the mentality, trying to fit in society that you feel it doesn't belong to you. I had that kind of feeling when I came, but I always go back to my foster family and my foster care, and she always says, no, Rishan, you need to continue going. I find that support mentally and physically, everything, whatever I face outside, I go back to my foster care and I have that kind of support. But young people, they don't have it. They're always just in a shared house. Nobody like think about what they're doing or what they're facing. But again, I just want to emphasize that the young people and us, I keep saying young people as I'm not young people, I'm still young people, but I'm just saying when we have the really good opportunity and support from people, we always want to work on ourselves and do well, not just for ourselves, but as again, for this giving back to this country, because I'm wishing like to be in the NHS one day. So yeah, to be honest, that's what I would just want to say. And thank you for everyone for listening.
Thank you. Now, one more contribution, that's from Luann, please. Oh, Thomas, keep coming, keep putting your hands up. I've got to bring the meeting to a halt. Now, come on. Come on, Luann, please. Yes, go ahead.
I think start with the education system. I agree with Rishan. There are so many young people that have, they got so many ambition. They want to be someone, but because of lack of support, they can't be. I'm not saying no. Some professionals are really good. Some PA, social workers, they support them really well, but for these young people in the community who goes like from meal bank straight to accommodation, I feel they are excluded from the society most of the time, because they don't know how to access support. There is not much signposting, and then there's a lot of things happen. For example, we have young people who's in prison. They make all this journey, they come to the UK, and then they do something wrong because of lack of understanding sometimes, because if they are in independent accommodation, they're a young person, they don't have someone behind them to say that this is wrong, this is right. Especially UK law is completely different from some cultures, how they treat girls with the boys. I think these people in support accommodation, they need support. They're at risk. They're too vulnerable. They're too vulnerable to be used by drugs. But so many things that can be affected their life. And then it's very. I feel really sad for these people. They made all this journey to come to change their life, and then they end up in prison.
Contribution is Thomas, please. Thomas. No. You're muted, Thomas.
Sorry about that.
Okay.
All the time.
Okay, go ahead.
Was just want to say two things, like a solution that I'm thinking. The one is, I think we need like a kind of mental support on, like, especially the waiting is traumatizing, because it might even take 5 years, 6 years, for some people even more than that. And I have friends, they really need support, probably thinking about mental support, establishing mental support for people waiting for these things, because they have lots of things to deal. Something is going back home, and there's a lot of issues going there. And I feel another solution, supporting networks like NGOs, especially like crime, is like one thing we have here in Canterbury. You know, when something happens, they just run to there as if there is every solution is there. No, it's not, because I think it's very you can see the situation at crime. It's very busy, chaotic, really. So I think supporting this kind of networking, especially NGOs that connect different communities, as in the residents' communities, because there is some change. It would be helpful, really helpful for both sides. Yeah, that's what I wanted to say.
Right. Well, thank you very much indeed. We're just about at the end of our time. Could I thank all of you participants, all of you who've contributed, or those of you who've simply been here? Thank you very much indeed for coming along. Thanks to the parliamentarians. I think two of them had to go. Thank you for coming along. As far as I know, the APPG will now take what's come up in the discussion and turn it into a report. So there should be a report coming along. I think it's been an excellent discussion. I have one question which I hope I can feed into the report, and it's simply this: that there are variations in practice on the range of issues we've talked about, and there is probably excellent practice which we can all learn from. And I'm wondering how we can best disseminate good practice so we can all learn from the best that's going on. I'm not saying there's any bad practice, but we can learn from that. So I'm hoping that the report that the APPG will produce will represent a move towards best practice. And can I just say one other thing? Several of you have mentioned mental health and suicides and so on. I'm hoping, I had a student from the Royal College of Psychiatry, actually a doctor, who worked with me for a year, and she's produced a report on mental health support, which I hope, we're just going through the last stage of editing it, and I hope very much that we can produce that, which will meet at least some of the concerns, or begin to take a step towards meeting some of the concerns that you've talked about. But I think it's been a very useful discussion. My thanks to the British Association for Social Workers for their help in this, and my thanks again to all of you. And there'll be a report, and we'll all learn from that. All the best to you. Thank you.